Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. As you'll see, we have a few trivia questions as you wait. So we will be starting soon, and just type your answers into the chat box and we'll take a look at them. Welcome to the webinar. Hello, everybody. I'm going to switch the trivia question in just a second. So if you want to take a guess, and two of you will get a copy of Drew's book, and it's going to be a random selection. So really nice to see everybody. And Michael, thank you for being the first to enter. You're in the drawing. And Matthew, excellent. Okay, next one. We're going to the next one, and we will be starting in a few minutes. Here's question number 2. Don't worry if you didn't get number 1. Oh, nice to see everybody. Just answer in the chat box. Oh, Carrie, we have a Diptera and a Hymenoptera. Interesting. We'll leave this up for another few seconds before we get started. Ooh, we're kind of split between the Hymenopteras and the flies. And Drew, I had to throw in an insect. Sorry, most are about birds.
But, you know, it's an insect. They're insects with wings, so we can deal with that, right?
That's right. Okay, next question. Whoops, here we go. What is a group of owls called? And what is a group of hawks called? So put your answers into the chat, and welcome everybody. We'll get started in just a little bit. A kettle of hawks, a parliament of owls. Excellent. And people are still joining. Welcome everybody to the webinar. We're just doing a few little trivia to get started. Okay, and the last one before we get started. Which of these birds have the longest lifespan in the wild? Oh, look at that. Oh, we have a penguin along with the albatross, a swan. Interesting. We'll get started in another minute. We still have another 30 seconds. And we will randomly select 2 people who have been answering the trivia correctly to win a copy of Drew's book. Whoops, back here. The answers. So according to the Cornell lab, there are about 2,059 species of birds in North America. And that insect, even though it looks like a bee, is actually a fly because it has 2 wings. There's a parliament of owls and also a cast of hawks or a kettle of hawks, and albatrosses can live more than 50 years. So great job, everybody, on the chat. And please go ahead and enter your name and where you're from, what city, where you're zooming in from. We'd love to hear from all of you. So happy to have you on today. And welcome to everybody who is just joining right now to our webinar this afternoon. How do we find good find good in the bad times, nurturing nature in the time of COVID. My name is Judy Browse, and I'm the Executive Director of NAAEE, and we're just really, really happy to have you on. And we see people from all over Canada, all over North America. Fantastic. And I know, and we all know that this has been a really, really difficult time for so many people in our field, given all the closures, the layoffs, the stress from trying to work with so many other worries. And I just want to thank all of you for everything that you're doing, just the fact that you're on this webinar and you're trying to learn and engage. You're doing such creative and wonderful things in the communities where you are to help support your staff, your colleagues, your kids, your communities, the field. So I know it's hard, and just wanted to thank all of you for everything that you're doing. And we are so lucky to have Drew with us today, and he will be helping us find some good in these bad times and how to think about how nature can help us during this crisis. We really couldn't have a better person with us on this webinar this afternoon. And I'll do a better introduction in just a minute from Drew, but first, just a couple of more introductory comments. For those of you who are new to NAAEE during this crisis, we're trying to hold many more webinars than normally. We used to do one a month. Now we're trying to do one almost every week, depending on our speakers. And they're on topics that focus on how do we get through the crisis, but also to bring new ideas, new thinking, new inspiration, new joy to our work. So we'll have them on a variety of different topics, as you'll see. And next, actually, it's next week. We also have a wonderful webinar with Amy Nizuku-Matatio, who is a wonderful writer and poet. And so we've got two writers and poets in a row. We're really excited about that. I also want to give big thank you to our affiliate co-hosts for all the work that you are doing in your states and provinces and regions, and reaching out to and advertising these webinars. And we're really happy to be working with you on so many things, including this webinar series. So thank you, thank you. And then I know that many of you are on calls like 24 hours a day, and we know that not everybody is using Zoom. So we do want to make sure that everyone feels like they know how this works and you can communicate with us through the chat. So if you look for the chat, many of you have already found it, you're answering, you're telling us where you're from. But just know that you can either send a message to Drew, Ann, and I, and Gabby is helping us with the captioning. Thank you, Gabby. Or you can send a note to everyone, including us and the panelists and everybody. So hopefully you understand how this works. Everybody is muted because we'd have too much noise, and we're so happy to have you on board. As we go through this, please type your questions and any resources into the chat. We will save the chat. You'll get a copy of the recording. You'll get a copy of the chat, and you'll get a copy of the slides after this is over. So we'll save that, but we'd love to hear any ideas that you have and any resources that might be good for everybody. And as I mentioned, we're doing live captioning during today's webinar for any of you that might be having audio problems. So that will also come out in the recording. And thank you, Anne, for everything that you're doing, helping to orchestrate this webinar series, all the hard work that you're doing. If you have any issues, you can send them to me or to her. She'll probably be the one that can help you. And I'll just say, hey, Anne, what should we do? But thank you so much. Anne is our Director of Professional Development, and she's a manager of EE360. So thank you, Anne. And now comes the fun part. I get to introduce Drew Lanham. And I am really excited because I know that many of you have read Drew's bio and you have a sense of his breadth and depth of his work, but you might not know that he's an educator, a researcher, a thought leader, a conservationist, and an artist. He's also a sought after speaker, and we've been really lucky to have Drew as a keynote speaker at several NAAEE conferences. He's also an award-winning author and poet and a distinguished professor at Clemson University in the Department of Forestry and Environmental Conservation. I was so fortunate that Drew was part of the inaugural Together Green Fellowship Program when Ann and I were at the National Audubon Society together with Together Green, and he provided so much leadership to the entire cadre of other fellows. He was an enormous asset to the overall program, and since then, I've just watched his career take off. he was already had an amazing career and take off in many new directions. His passion for environmental justice, conservation, and leadership is truly unmatched. And every time I listen to him, I learn something and I get inspired to do more. What is remarkable to me about Drew, along with everything else I just said, is he can translate conservation science, making it relevant in ways that are understandable and evocative. As a Black American, he's intrigued with how culture can bend perceptions of nature and its care, and his connecting the conservation dots and coloring the conservation conversation. Those messages have been delivered to audience across North America and around the world. As I mentioned earlier, he's a widely published author and an award-nominated poet, writing about his experiences as a birder, hunter, and wild wandering soul. And his posts on social media have a committed following, like me, that anxiously await every word he says, not only on his reflections on nature, but on life and on current events and what we all might do. And so during this really difficult time for the world, I can't think of anybody I'd rather hear from than Drew, my good friend. Take it away, Drew, and let's give him a virtual welcome.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, and to Anne for being such a great friend and partner in all of this, and to Gabby, who's doing our closed captioning today, and to everyone who's joined us from around the country and internationally. Thanks for stepping in on what I'm sure is probably like your first Zoom call, right? of ever. But I wanted to take the opportunity that Judy has so graciously given me to sort of open up the floor, first of all, for questions that you might have. I can't promise answers. I can always promise a response, even if it's a shoulder shrug. But then from there to begin to share how I'm personally getting through this difficult time, but also maybe give you some inroads into how we as nature nurturers, as educators, as facilitators of these connections to wildness and to the nature around us, how we can be better at that. So I wanted to start off the day really with some ideas, and I was thinking about how so many of us, obviously now we are having to distantly connect, but I was thinking about how that happens beyond Zoom or a webinar or whatever platform it is that we're using. And for me, I started actually on March 17 with a folder that I called Corona Writings, and many of these writings, and I had no intention of keeping a journal really. For all intents and purposes, Facebook and Instagram, and to some small degree, lesser degree, Twitter are my mechanisms for journaling. But I wanted to share with you sort of a timeline, a chronology that maybe helps you think about how you're keeping track, because I think it's important to keep track. And I would say not so important for me to keep track of numbers, because that's something that keeps, unfortunately, horrifically climbing. And we need to be aware of where we are. We need to be aware of those statistics. I'm not suggesting that we stick our collective heads in the sand as some sort of mythical ostrich might do, but to say that we step back for a moment. And a big part of this really is about survival now. And a large part of the survival beyond simply existing and living is this thing that I like to call thrival. So I wrote this first piece on March the 17th called Distant Pondering. And the 17th was right around the time for me that it became quote unquote real. Yeah, we saw this coming. We knew that it had left Asia, that it was creeping across Europe, and that soon it would come across the Atlantic. But at this point in time, we were still enrolled in school. They hadn't officially shut everything down yet. And so this distant pondering was my thoughts. And I said, what will we collect in these days of fear? Can assurance or security be wrapped in crinkled brown paper, set outside our doors in a box by some deliverer we don't know, left for us to wipe down? Then shrink wrap opened up to reveal things that will make us braver in the prisons once known as home? What will we come to embrace in these distancing days? Will the touches and hugs and handshakes we'd always given, even to strangers, be somehow replaced by other intimacies? Can the wild birds I watch come a bit closer to soothe lonely heart? Will furred companions who can only mew or purr or bark or tail wag learn to speak our language to tell us that they really do care? Or perhaps we must meet them socially halfway and learn theirs, become cat man or dog woman ourselves. As for me, I will become even more part-time wild bird. Fly away by night on dreams unseen by anyone else. Overhead through clouded ink black skies, go wherever I please, choose my own course. Rub feathers with other would-be part-time wild bird kind seeking the same. This, then, is what I will collect, what I can embrace. The things uninfected in the furthest remote reaches of my socially distanced head. And so that was really sort of the beginning for me of this thing that I do, of thinking about each day, and really not thinking about each day, but sometimes just reacting to it. And I think that's an important thing to do. Two things that we hear during this time is the refrain of, I can't wait to return to normal. I can't wait to return to normal. So I want us to keep that in mind sort of as we go through. And I would offer that we can't return to normal for several reasons. First of all, I think the world is forever changed. After these kinds of things, it always is. The world has become a smaller place. It has been shrunk by a virus, really. And so we're all connected in how we're impacted. So it's no longer normal. Just as the internet and technology shrinks us, sometimes virology and pathogens shrink us. So understanding sort of nature's role in shrinking our world, and that we can't return to normal. And so all of those things that we think about as normal, many of them have changed. Of course, we want to return to sitting shoulder to shoulder. We want to return to hugs instead of handshakes. We want to return to face-to-face meetings at some point in time, as opposed to these binary relationships. But then I think as environmentalists, as conservationists, as nature nurturers, as lovers of the wild, I think that we really have to think about how we don't return to the normal that was. And even as policies are rolled back day after day to make our environment less secure and less accessible, I think there is good that we can find a silver lining in the dark cloud that's out there for us to see. A lot of this is as close as our backyard, and some of that I would like to share with you. Some of it, a little bit of it, you'll see scrolling on the slideshow. But I would offer that the first thing that we do, and to sort of paraphrase Lord Vader, don't deny your feelings you know to be true. Don't expect, the first thing that I am having to learn is not to expect the old normal. Don't expect the old normal. Are we going to return to things as they always were? No, in some instances, unfortunately not. In some instances, maybe, fortunately not, if we take the time as nurturers to say, you know what, there were some things that we need to pay more attention to. So we can think about something as grand and horrific and threatening as climate change at the current point in time, and understand that there are people in the world as we speak that are seeing vistas that they've never seen before because the air is suddenly clear, that we have more oil and petroleum reserves than we can ever use. And so perhaps we can begin to think about how to more sustainably and hopefully wean ourselves away from many of these things that are responsible for the earth warming. So in not denying your feelings, in dealing with all of the anxiety and some of the sadness and the fear, which are feelings that we all have. And so I think, at least for me, those are some of the things that came out at first. How would we be able to deal as nature nurturers with what's coming, with what will be? And so that first thing is, again, not to be in denial, not to be in denial. And so in not returning to the old normal, what's the new normal going to be? Well, I think part of that for me, which is not new, which is as old as humankind and living in wildness, is that nature can become for us, I think, an anti-numbing agent. I mean, if I could see hands or head nods out there, how many people are feeling like they are being, at this point in time, numbed? I mean, almost numb to inaction. So in thinking about the number of calls that you're on a daily basis, having to react from a distance, not being able to read body language or to say good morning or to have a cup of coffee, looking at a favorite place with a friend or a colleague, we miss all of those connections. And really the distance that we operate can serve to numb us. I would offer that nature offers an opportunity. It offers an opportunity for, it's a stimulant, really. As much as a cup of coffee might be requisite for some of us, let's think about how nature becomes this anti-numbing agent. And even closing your eyes at some point in time and thinking about a place, recalling a time, recalling all of your senses, bringing everything to bear, even the memory of smells, of aromas, of the feeling of wind on the back of your neck, of the feeling of rain on your face, of the feeling of your toes in the sand, that first warmth of the spring past the bone chill of winter. Thinking about all of those things is an exercise, I think, in anti-numbing. And all of that is bringing nature to bear without moving out of your chair. So in thinking about how nature becomes your stimulant, some of it is the trip in your mind. So even as we are homebound, we're sheltering in place, how do you travel outside of your body? How do you travel outside of your space? How do you move in a way on your daily walk around the yard or the house or your commute that's gone from several blocks or several miles? Or for some of us, on some days, a commute of 1,000 miles on a jet plane. And now that commute has been reduced from the bedroom to the dining room table with the stop in between at the refrigerator and perhaps at the coffee maker. Well, in those trips, in those short peregrinations that you make, I think there's several destinations where you can stop in your head. And that may sound trivial, but it's an important thing. I will tell you that one of the things that's happened to me at this point in time is I look out in the backyard. It's a small backyard. We only live on about 3/4 of an acre, which might sound huge to some, and maybe it is. I mean, we're talking about mentalities of scale. But I want you to think about, if you're fortunate enough to have green space or even a little pot of plants, to look out and to see how the environment is impacting them. And so as a birder, I'm always looking out in the backyard this time of year to see which birds have come in from the night before. They're the beautiful birds that are in the backyard, the cardinals, the Carolina wrens that wake me up, the tufted titmice, the Carolina chickadees, the American robins, all of those birds that awaken me. And then I'm looking for the new birds to come in. But part of what's happened now is that I have begun to pay even more attention to those homebodies, to the birds who share range with me year round. And so you go from being someone who's less appreciative of the common thing to becoming more appreciative of that common thing and finding the uncommon beauty in it. And that's critical. So thinking about what happens when you look at a robin and you focus on that robin. The American robin is a bird that Roger Tory Peterson claimed was the bird that everybody knows. And that might be true. That grayish, dark gray back, the blackish head in the male, but that brick red vest that bird wears gives us an opportunity to know that bird, to identify that bird. But who is that robin really? And I said who, I didn't say what. I mean, Turdus migratorius is the Latin binomial for that bird. But then for us to understand the robins in our yard, I've recognized that within the past few weeks, as I sit out in my backyard every morning, sort of in a meditation, that the birds have, I think, come to know me in a way that there's this expectation as I sit there on this little 6x6 patio beside, a fake plastic pond that I've contrived with these plants that I have nurtured in these pots that have come to life in the springtime here, that this morning I had a northern cardinal, a red bird, fly and perch within 2 feet of me. And it sat there for a moment and looked and didn't stay very long, but accepted me in a way that that the birds in the backyard haven't in the past. And so I think it's a matter of what we would call habituation, in part, that I've become lawn furniture. So being still and accepting nature in that way. So I've gone from being a birder to a bird watcher. Those are two different things. To a bird adorer, I think. So appreciating those common birds in the backyard helps us to know those birds, not just the robin, but then helps us to know as new birds and new things come into our life. So I'd like to make sure that I'm giving space for questions if you have them. I would like for this to be a discussion as much as it can. I can't see hands being raised or those kinds of things, but I know that Ann and Judy are keeping track. So if you have questions, if there are questions out there, Judy or Ann, I would be happy to take any of them.
So Drew, somebody had asked, any tips for new writers as you think about how you put your words to paper and you're enjoying nature? Any tips for those aspiring to try and help get their thoughts out?
Yes, great question. The first thing, to get your thoughts out as a writer, write. And you hear that from every workshop, every English comp teacher that you've ever had from middle school on up to write. I say don't overthink your writing. There is a point in time, especially now, if we're doing science writing, there's obviously a very different kind of thought process that goes into that. And we have to be diligent and careful to that process. As a poet, I like to do what I call flash writing, flash flood. So imagining that you have this sudden downpour of emotion, of ideas from seeing a bird or seeing a flower or even thinking of it, having some memory. Get that down. A poem is as important as a prayer or a dream. And I don't think that any poem or prayer or dream should ever be the same. Even though it may seem as though you're repeating some mantra, there's a different inflection at a different place in time, as always with those. So in writing, get what's here first. So not going through head first, but going through heart. And that's a sort of different process for a lot of people, because they're thinking, oh my God, I can't possibly write that down. Well, that's what editing is for later. But I like to think about letting the words come first through my heart, then up through my head, and then they cycle. They cycle. Now, if it's an outlet and I get to speak those words, I get to read those words to someone else, and I read my words to myself. I'll read aloud to myself sometimes. I can recycle those words and I can keep them in. But the first piece of advice I give any writer is to just write. Don't think about what you're writing, free form. Write what's in your head first, through your heart first, and then deal with those words later. And you'll find that's a very liberating thing. A lot of people don't write because they think they can't write. So that thinking is a block. It's like the Hoover Dam to your heart's flow. So if that dam is up, then you're not going to get truth from it. So write from your heart as the filter first.
Anne, do you want to ask another one, and then we'll let you
Sure.
go on, Drew?
If we have time for another question, Drew, Catherine Owen is asking, she's a lifelong nature adorer, but she's finding it harder these days to just appreciate it without worrying about the future of nature and those negative thoughts creeping in. Do you have any suggestions that you found helpful to be in the moment in nature?
Yes. Hi, Catherine. Catherine lives not too far from here, and a wonderful, wonderful artist. Glad to see you on. I'll share this with you, Catherine, because I'm the same way. And I wrote this on March 31st. And I said, breathe deeply as you can. Pull every molecule of life in, every bit of love and goodness you ever had the pleasure of giving or the gift of receiving. Suck it into your marrow bone. Do not let it stop at your lungs. No, inhale this existence. Imbibe this all now as if it were everything and your last, because it is. Breathe in. Now out. Repeat until you cannot. So, Catherine, I wrote that because I had those feelings, those anxious feelings of what was going to become of tomorrow or the next hour. And part of the reason that I wrote that is that I was reading a whole lot about the disease process with COVID. And I read the accounts of people struggling for breath. And in the moment, if you'll recognize that and some of us do it, I think consciously, that on a daily basis, we take one of those very deep belly breaths so that you're breathing not from your lungs, but from your belly. And it's a very deep, thorough exchange. And if you'll notice when you read about people suffocating and not being able to breathe and being intubated on respirators, that suddenly you find yourself breathing as deeply as you can, and you only worry about that one breath. And then the next breath comes. And I would advise that maybe thinking about that is an important thing. I can tell you now, when I wake up every morning, the first thing that I do is recognize that I'm breathing. I had never done that before. And that I'm breathing unencumbered at that point in time. And that's important. And I can't worry about anything beyond that inhalation and that exhalation. And that's all that gets us from one breath, one heartbeat, one thought to the next. And I think as nature nurturers, we have to nurture our now, because we can't nurture the future without the now. And so in taking care of ourselves and taking care of what's before us now, it gives us some strength, some energy to deal with what will come. You know, it's as if you imagined a hurdle race, and a hurdler, they have to imagine at that moment that single hurdle, not the hurdle to come, but the hurdle that they are in the midst of skimming over. So that's how I try to deal with it. And it doesn't always work. But when I take a deep breath and I breathe out and I look at the rose-breasted grosbeaks that are in the yard now that have been here longer than I ever remember, I think about the days that I have rose-breasted grosbeaks and that I can see that beauty of that bleeding heart on that beautiful bird, and the way they behave in the cherry trees, and how they wait until the cardinals give them some indication that it's safe to come into the feeder. And I try not to think about the days that I don't have those rose-breasted grosbeaks. I'm trying to relish the days that I have them. So we don't have to think about breath, really, but I think we do now. And so, Catherine, if you'll think about those breaths, if you'll think about that inhalation and that exhalation, and if you're the same Catherine Owen that maybe I'm thinking about, maybe you're not, maybe you're a namesake, but I think about creating art and the artist being present in that pot that she throws, or the painting that's being painted, or the photographer as she's looking at that picture and framing it. And everything comes together in that moment, not in some future moment. Does that make sense? I hope so.
Yes,
I hope so.
that was great, Drew.
So and that brings to mind this idea, something else that I wanted to talk about, that first question with writing, and then the follow-up question with sort of the immediacy of the issue and how we can appreciate the nature and the beauty of now as we worry about what's to come. And I'll go back a little bit, and I think that's one of the problems that we have had as a movement, and we are a movement, make no mistake. I think we're a green force for good. But I want us to be able to, instead of thinking, having the woe is us, woe is the world mentality, and the world is in woe, make no mistake about it. But then we are so woeful that at times we fail to recognize the beauty that still lies in front of us, that's there. And so we can't see the beauty of that bird or that blossom or that butterfly. Instead, all we can think about is its demise. And so one of the ways that I have tried to communicate my feelings, not deny my feelings, be truer to them, is to use social media sort of as an outlet. Now, that's nothing new, right? We all know people, maybe ourselves, who use social media in that way. But I think as we talk about nurturing nature, it's a critical time for us to sort of redefine what the environmental movement is, or to maybe bring a sharper focus into it. For people to understand that it's not just about the bad news, which people are getting in spades today. Think about it. If you turn on a news channel, then you're getting a recycling, almost a running tally of deaths, of the spread of this dread disease and how it's impacting friends and family, this fear of our fatalities. And so how do we exude some joy? I love it, again, and maybe some of you might say it's Pollyanna, but I love seeing how friends are finding the tiny silver linings in the dark clouds of a day. How they see in their backyards, or they look out on the stoop. I was talking to my friend, my birder friend, David Lindo, last week, I think it was, and he was in Spain, and he was on his 40th day of being housebound, only having a hallway to walk up and down and an occasional trip up to a stoop. And I asked him in our conversation how he had managed to survive these 40 days of being sequestered alone. And he talked about the hawks that he had seen. He talked about these conversations that he was having with other birders and bird adorers, and it was expanding his world. And now I see where they have been allowed in certain portions of Spain to get out, and he's walked to the edge of the city, and he's able to see birds. And those birds, I guarantee you, mean so much more to him. But this conversation that David Lindo and I had was across the miles. It was a Zoom call. It was across thousands of miles that we were able to meet on social media in a new way. So I would offer that social media offers us a chance to not just spout the bad news, and there's plenty of bad news to spout, but to mix in where we can some sweetness, some goodness, to let people know that nature can be a healer, that it can be something that gives us some moments of reality beyond this reality that exists, this terrible reality that exists in front of us. And so if you have the opportunity to share the past, pictures from places that you've been, if you have the opportunity to share memories in nature, if you have the opportunities to even talk about, wow, I cannot wait until I get back to my favorite park and I'm able to just walk freely, or to smell the fresh air and take a deep belly full of that air, then that gives I think, others inspiration that you might sometimes underestimate. And we can do all of that through social media. Facebook is one platform. I absolutely love IG, Instagram. I love going there and posting pictures. And I'll tell you, part of what happened to me during this time, as we have gone through or going through this pandemic, is life in all these other ways goes on differently, but goes on in many ways. And horrifically, with what happened in Brunswick, Georgia, with Ahmaud Arbery, was just an absolute. It was an absolute headwind for me, and I had to deal with that in a very different way. I had to deal with that in a way that that would allow me to speak to the frustration of being a Black man in America who has to constantly face these things. And I'll share something with you that I wrote on May the 6th, and then I'd like to take some more questions. But this is a little bit after my town, Seneca, Seneca, South Carolina, had experienced a devastating tornado. And daily it seemed that we were under storm warnings. And so on May the 6th, I initially wrote, "Daily the winds come. It is almost always from the west here. Southwest means warm and wet. Northwest means cooler weather. When the two somehow collide, we're knee-deep in watches and warnings, thunderstorms, tornadoes, hail. Thinking today that if the northwest gusts continue, it will be a tough way to go for migrating birds trying to make their way forward." So I wrote that morning because, man, it was just so blustery. And I watched these birds hunkered down, and I was thinking about these headwinds, and I was thinking about an individual bird, and thinking too that as the birds were eating at my feeder, perhaps this was an opportunity for the birds to get extra fuel, to get some extra micro burst of energy to make it through some headwind, and that maybe the sunflower seeds that I'm offering, the suet that I'm offering in my backyard, the cover that I'm offering in my backyard, even though all of it's not perfectly native, that there's some non-native things there. There are things that by ecological reasoning shouldn't be, but the birds were finding safety there, that somehow my little yard offered a refuge and an opportunity to go forward successfully. That made me happy. By mid-afternoon, and the news of the Ahmaud Arbery case was making the news. By that evening, I had written this: "Would love to be posting pretty pictures of backyard birds I've identified in this quarantine time. But today I'm thinking from my backyard of my own identity as a Black man and the pestilent, virulent privilege of impunity. Even as some of majority America finally recognizes that Black and brown skin has been a pre-existing condition that killed us in dramatically disproportionate numbers way before viruses did, even as certain citizens arm themselves and occupy state capitals without pause or retribution, even as those vigilant citizens profile Black men innocently jogging or driving or sitting in their own homes, or maybe birding, to gun them down because of a notion that they favor some criminal suspect and that it's their responsibility to keep the law, even as those essentially serving still bear risk that those who say open up will not have to bear, I cannot just watch the birds in gusts of heavy wind without thinking of the barriers that persist. And I'm supposed to be comfortable going around in a mask. Forgive me, America, if I just don't trust you. There's more to kill me out there than COVID, and it's been more persistently deadly than any microbe ever was. Truth be told, my range retracts every time this almost daily news comes to light. Impunity is the virus that can't be cured, and in its pestilence there are no curves flattened, just human beings of color lying flat dead in the streets. And people wonder why so many of us find hope hard to hang on to or trust that the system will heal the wrongs. Peace to the family of Ahmad Marquez Arbery, 25, who was gunned down by two Americans who saw their civic duty in chasing a young man down in their pickup truck and taking his Black life, because they could and knew that in all likelihood, they'll go without even a slap on the wrist. Don't get too distracted. Life and death go on in all kinds of insidious ways. So I'm sorry, y'all. Today, the birds, the beauty, climate change, COVID, everything will have to wait while I reset. So, you saw how May 6th went. And it started off in a day when I was really thinking about birds in this sort of personal way. And then, man, the wind blew harder with the revelation of that case. So I did not want to deny those feelings. I didn't want people to think that I'm just in my backyard reveling in watching these birds come through and not having real life touch me. That's not what this is about. But it is about having some base to return to. And nature is that base. Nature is that base. No matter what God you believe in or don't believe in, evolution's going to happen whether you believe it or not. Gravity's going to happen whether you believe it or not. And so those two sort of immutable forces, those things, as I watch a bird fly to overcome gravity, as I marvel over a single bird and think about millions of years of evolution in my backyard gracing my feeder, my imperfect patch of ground, I can take comfort in that, even in the midst of all the injustices and bad news that happens. So it's an important thing to take courage now. Do we have any questions, Judy or Ann?
Yes, we do. There are a lot of comments in the chat room, Drew, that you're going to have to read later about how your words are impacting all of us. So pull myself together here. And there were a number of questions related to how do you inspire teens to be bird watchers? What do you want your students that are at the college level to know and feel and believe when they leave? And then there was one related to how do we help people that don't have access to green space connect with nature? So take a pick, and then I think Ann has a few as well.
Okay. Two of the questions are kind of related, I think, in getting young people into birds. One of those things is first to take advantage of what we all are from the beginning. We're noticers. Even in utero, we're noticing fingers and toes. And so from the beginning, we are noticers. And I think it's important not to immediately try to dump someone into knowing every bird on the continent. It's important, for example, when I'm out on a bird walk, I had to learn, stop for the cardinal. Everyone doesn't see 12 cardinals a day. And even if they did, I was making assumptions about the redness of a cardinal as if to say that they weren't different individuals. So I think for young people, that's one of the things. I like to slow down. I like to take advantage of the birds that show themselves in this way that allows us to begin to know who they are. And as people begin to develop relationships with these birds, then they go on to the next one and the next one and the next one. Or maybe they stop and they're fixated on this one for an extraordinarily long period of time. I had a student a couple of years ago, Leah, I can't remember Leah's last name, but Leah became intrigued with common grackles, this black bird that almost everyone overlooks. And Leah became, oh God, they were the greatest birds to her. And I started thinking about grackles in a different way. And I think others in the class started thinking about grackles in a different way, and that Leah was this black bird obsessed person. I think that's important. So that's sort of that cliche of meeting people where they are, but sometimes let them take you where they want to go. Okay. So meet them where they are, then let them lead you. So a lot of times people will tell us what their learning capacities are. They will tell us what they want to know, because they don't always want to know what you want to know. And that's an assumption of the educator that is sometimes hard to get past. It's a different sort of education. I would rather call it facilitation. So understanding where people are, what their interests are, and maybe it's that when we're out on a bird walk, I'll notice, and it happens all the time, I'll notice someone who's not looking up at the vireos or the warblers, but they're looking down at the ground. Maybe they're looking at a flower, a blossom. Maybe they're looking at a salamander or a toad. Maybe they've got a rock in their hands and they're rubbing it and they're appreciating the texture of it. At that point in time, if I don't know what they're looking at or haven't reached down to feel the rock that they're feeling, then I'm trying to pull them to where I am instead of going to where they are and traveling with them. So that then leads to sort of this next question of what about those people that don't have green space? And we know one of the things that we're finding out during this pandemic is we're discovering, not discovering really, so many inequities are being illuminated, let's say, things that have always been there. The inequities, the lack of access to not just services, but to things, but then to places. All of that is sort of coming together in this way that spells disaster. So I had thought about that a little bit, and I said, what if there's no green to go to? And as much as we, and this is something that I think many of us could never have envisioned, or we didn't. You know, for so long, we've told people when they're out, put down your phone, disconnect, unplug, get out. Well, guess what? We're at a point in time now where we're telling people, wow, stay in. It's the safest thing for you. So guess what? In part, now it's time, instead of scrolling to the news or through a bad news feed, why not virtually travel? If you have the opportunity to travel by some documentary all the way around the world, do that. If you have the chance to listen to Sir David Attenborough as he talks about the amazing weaver bird in South Africa, then do that. Do those things. Take those opportunities to travel virtually. There's green space near you everywhere. Even though sometimes it would appear that we are lost, there is green space in places that you can go without cost. So in thinking about where you are, now is a great opportunity to help those who are without sort of this immediate access of a backyard, to begin to think about where those places are. Now, for us as facilitators and nurturers, it's also time for us to get on our policy horses and to begin to think about, okay, how do I change the policy to make sure that everyone has access to this place? And that's extraordinarily important. And how do I make sure past this that we take better care, not just of the people, but that we take care of those places? So thinking outside of the box that we're in, and what are the recommendations that we can make? So in some places, as they relax regulations and people will inevitably get out, if you can, encourage folks to go to places that everybody else isn't going. Or if it's possible for them to go at times when others aren't going, to try as much as we can to socially distance as folks get out. You know, if there's a small pocket park where everyone hasn't congregated, then maybe you can go there for a brief moment. Maybe you can get outside on the stoop and look up and see clouds passing overhead. Perhaps there are hawks soaring overhead, as they were for David Lindo in Spain, that you see. Maybe there are pigeons that fly through the concrete canyons of your city. And I want you to think about those pigeons anymore, not just as pest birds, but birds that have a freedom and a liberty that you aspire to. And all of a sudden, a bird that you did not appreciate becomes larger than life. And when we're finally into a life of being out again with some relative freedom, we can think about pigeons in sort of a different way. We can create nature in gardens, in clay pots. There are opportunities there to create your own food pathways. For young children, for example, to plant a cheap pack of lettuce seeds or herb seeds and to watch it grow, to nurture that, and then to enter that into your system. And all of a sudden, you have created a food pathway. And that's extraordinarily powerful, to go from a seed to a meal. And once you do that and understand the power in that soil, the power in nurturing with water, the power of the sun to nourish your body, and that you can do that, I think nature becomes closer.
Drew?
Yes.
So I wonder, since it's about 3 till the hour, Drew has graciously agreed to do a little bit of after school. And so what we'd like to do is maybe close out for those of you who have to leave at 4, and for those of you who want to stay on a few minutes, we can see if we can have Drew answer a few of the questions that we did not get to. And the comments in the chat, Drew, will really hearten you. You have heartened everybody's day today. So Anne, I'm going to turn it over to you. And Drew, just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you for, you know, your wise words. I've written so many things: concrete canyons of your city, all the words that you always bring to all of us, and you do bring sunshine to all of us, as well as how can we together create a more just future. So we'll continue the conversation after 4 o'clock, but Anne, take it away to wrap up, and then we'll continue.
Thank you, Drew. Just want to add my thanks and appreciation and a brand new word, thrival, that I think I will appreciate now. And we are recording this webinar. I just wanted to end with a few announcements. We will be sharing the recording with everybody. We'll be sharing the slides and notes and the chat box. I know there were lots of great questions and thoughts, so look for that later. Hopefully by tomorrow, you'll get that recording. And if you are looking for more inspiration and other opportunities to learn with us, Judy mentioned that next week we'll be talking about nature transformation with Amy Nez next week, a week from today. Also, please join us a week later with Angela Park. She's going to be talking about some of the inequities that have been coming up during this COVID time and what we can do as environmental educators, as environmental lovers to address those inequities. And we'll be seeing part 2 from Kristen Grimm coming in June. So lots more coming up. Also, in response to what's happening with COVID and quarantine and everybody staying home, NAAEE has been hard at work compiling a ton of resources for educators out there that are now working from home, trying to educate kids at home, trying to do all these things virtually. So please check out our website. We've got a ton of resources out there divided by age and grade band, and we're adding new resources to this list every day. And we want to continue to hear more from you about your thoughts about how we can better organize these types of webinars. If you have ideas for potential speakers, we want to hear from you. So we've got this survey posted on our website now, and I'll also be sharing it with all of you when we send out the recording tomorrow. And that's all the announcements I have. So whatever time we've got remaining, I think we can try to take on more questions. If you're up for it, Drew.
Yep, I sure am.
Let's see.
Go ahead, Ann.
Do you want
well, I could do the one on, I can't remember who asked this, but how can we, Drew, help shape this new normal that is a more just future? What are your words of advice to all of us?
I think, Ann and Judy, that one of the things and the lessons that I've had to learn, even though we've been sequestered, it's important to not be silent in that sequestration. It's important for people to understand our humanity in all of this. It's important for us to speak up, and we've had so much time to think and to reflect on who it is that we are, absent sort of our social selves, that it's imperative that we speak up. And so, from I talked about being on that policy horse from the point of view of all the rollbacks, for example, that are happening. That we take this time perhaps to strategize, that we take this time to coalesce, to reform, this green army that will take us forward in a new way. I think about, those people who are sequestered at home, but who don't have potable water. So, we think about and we complain about all the things that we don't have. Imagine not being able to turn on the faucet and just to have water that you can drink. And so, yeah, green space is it's a critical issue. Water is life. So I think, again, in this numbing, we've been sort of moved to inaction in many ways. And I think there are all kinds of avenues for us to continue to act, but don't be silent.
Ann, do you have
Yes,
another
I have
one?
a question here, Drew, from Ann
Thank you.
Byers. She's asking if you ever find it overwhelming or challenging to feel, act, and talk the way you do from your heart with the dominant head-based competitive culture that we all live in. And she also asks, how do you maintain your strength?
Wow. Yeah, it's difficult, but it's become the only way that I know, because for so much of my life, it's been living up to the expectation of head and what I knew, and operating only on what I knew. And so as the opportunities have come for me to be more expressive and to let my emotions show, and to show how those emotions impact my brain, So how my heart connects to my head, how my head connects to my heart, that current shifting, it's almost like a gear shift. So when you go to heart, man, that can be a sudden downshift, and you pick up speed, or sometimes, as in the case of Ahmaud Arbery and so many other shootings, it can be a sudden upshift, and suddenly you were speeding along, and then bam, there you are. Suddenly you go from overdrive back to first. No, you jam the transmission in reverse, and you go from being back in your seat speeding along to the airbag having deployed, and those are exhausting jolts. But I think it's important for me to live that way. It can be exhausting, quite frankly, and it can be exhausting in debilitating ways. And so you have to find ways to not only motivate yourself out of it, but you have to have people that you trust who understand those ups and downs of a heart-driven person. So, and I have family and friends who do some of that. But yeah, it's anyone who lives by their hearts. You're going to find it at times just filled with overwhelming joy that'll make you cry. I was watching a video today about southern wildness, and tears just welled up in my eyes. But then, if I watch the video of that young man being shot, I'm not even in my body. I'm somehow back to a time when I didn't even live, and people were being hanged from trees on the regular. So, but I have to take that. It's just who I am, and I think that's part of what I was talking about in the beginning. This is an opportunity to understand who you are. Don't go back to who you were. Don't do that. Use the opportunity to go to a different place. One of the things that I wanted to mention was there's so many courageous people, and we see so many courageous first line people helping us and defending us. One of the things that I don't want us to underestimate is the courage that this time gives us. It's made us think on a day-to-day basis about our lives, about the lives of loved ones. But in your own life, let this time be a time of courage giving, of taking courage. So one of the things I'll share is I took the opportunity during this time to take care of some business, quote unquote, to sort of move along in a line of doing things, and to let people know, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore. I've chosen to do something else, and that can be organizationally, that can be personally, but it's a time for truth, and to say, you know what, my heart and head maybe have come together in this, but I just feel like, and that's oftentimes the way you'll think about how many times you've said this, I just felt like it was time for me to move on. It's not your head telling you, it's your heart.
Wow. So Drew, thank you so much. There are so many comments in the chat room, people who have really appreciated your words right now and what you've said. And I know that a number of people that might not have read your books and your writings are going to definitely start following you and reading your words and thoughts. But you gave us so much to think about and so much to reflect on. And this idea that we are a movement and that we are a green force for good and that we need to act even though we are all in lockdown, I think was inspirational to all of us to think about how to appreciate nature and still move forward on that policy front and so many other things. So thank you so much. And thank you as always. And thanks to everybody who has been on this call. We will be sending 2 copies of Drew's book to 2 lucky winners and really look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you, Drew, for everything you do for all of us. And take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone. We will see you
Thank you.
again soon, and hang in there. We will get through this somehow.
We
Take
will.
care.
Take care, y'all.
Thank you, Drew.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.